Lindo and myself, Lawrence Agojo. Again, session outline already went through importance of data governance in AI, current data governance landscape in East Africa, and then cross-border data flows. So what I hadn't gone through specifically were the objectives of what this workshop is going to be. So first of all, we'll try, I take that back, I lie. We'd already gone through those. So basically what we will be discussing with respect to that is trying to understand what data governance in AI development is, again, then assess East African data governance landscape. Then what I hadn't mentioned in there was exploring legal and ethical challenges in data use for AI, which will be demonstrated through a bit of research work that CPIT has done, maybe 1 or 2 reports that CPIT has done where exploring legal and ethical challenges is very apparent. And then examining cross-border data flows for AI development, then coupling that with East African integration with respect to data. All right, so let's kick it off. So in understanding data governance, whenever people hear data governance, for some reason, they always contextualize it within data protection alone. But data governance is actually wider than just data protection. Data protection is but a small subset of what data governance is. So it's basically about roles, responsibilities, and processes for ensuring accountability for and ownership of data assets. So this lovely diagram here, I don't know if you can see it clearly, but it basically gives you the major or core components of what data governance really articulates and really has. So in it, it has elements of data architecture, data modeling and design, data storage and operations. For those of you who are slightly more tech inclined as opposed to more policy inclined, some of these terms are not new to you and you're familiar with them. So then we have data security there, which now comes in two elements. We have the policy elements of it where we talk about data protection, data security, data privacy. And then we have the slightly more technical elements of it, where we look at it in terms of areas of cybersecurity, areas of technological elements that are required for data security. Then we have data integration and interoperability, again, slightly more technical aspects. Then you have documents and contents, references to master data, data warehousing and business intelligence. Then we have metadata, and then data quality. So if you are more technical inclined as opposed to policy inclined, you'll find that some of these elements are really not new to you because they go within your day-to-day processes of handling data. If you're slightly more policy inclined, some of these elements are not new to you per se, but you can pull them out of different policy contexts, like our Data Protection Act, when it talks about elements of data security or data interoperability in some certain extent, and as well as data security. So those are not really new to you. So we'll go through some of our research outputs that have sort of enabled us to also understand what data governance really is. Some of this research began way back when the Data Protection Act was in play, or rather when considering data as an asset within the African continent was really significant. This was about 5 years ago, give or take. And we were really trying to explore, okay, fine. With respect to data protection, that's one core component of it. And with respect to elements of technology like artificial intelligence, which is another element of it, which basically data is the foundation of, how are we looking at data governance more holistically? So research was done and we had an output that looked at data governance principles. So we were trying to structure data governance principles and see whether, one, we can identify them within what was then being drafted as data protection laws, and just generally within the context of how data is generally being perceived and what already exists. Because nothing, again, is new under the sun. There's always a foundational basis for something. So in understanding this, we looked at data governance in the sense that it involves management of data assets, including legal, human rights, technological, security, and economic considerations. And what this report also highlighted was the necessity for establishing clear principles and frameworks for data governance. So in identifying the significant principles that relate to data governance, they were classified into 4. So this comes from research background of a paper by an author called P. Boras. And with it, he classified data governance principles within 4 key components, because within each of these components, there are different layers that also add to what the principles prescribe. So he looked at the principle of organization, for example, And with the principle of organization, there was a tier where he looked at decision rights, which is in terms of what decisions are usually made when people are using data. He looked at it in terms of balanced roles. What are the main roles of all the people who would be handling data, and what principles are they required to use? And he also looked at it within the context of the role of the user, which is often the consumer, and now the role of the developer or technologist. Then he looked at it within the context of segregation of duties and concerns. So in the hierarchy of dealing with data, all the way from identifying where you're getting your data from, to collection, processing, storage, etc., what key elements came in with respect to separation of duties? Who was within each tier and how are they handling the data within there? Then in terms of data stewardship as well. The data stewardship, the main component here that was being focused on is within the elements of looking at data and within the core context of the entire processing unit of data. Who are the key people who are there from the beginning to the end and who are championing these specific principles on an organizational level? Then there was data ownership, of course, which is something that is big. We look at data ownership not in terms of myself as user or the people who actually collect our data, but then in a bigger context in terms of data sovereignty. Where is data supposed to be held ultimately? Then we looked at it was looked at under organization in terms of improved coordination and decision making. At the end of the day, on organizational structure, how are you using your data for decision making ultimately? Because data that doesn't just sit, isn't meant to just sit in a vacuum or in and of itself. So I'll try and go through the next three principles slightly quicker. So another principle was in terms of alignment, and with alignment they meant in terms of does the data you have meet your either business organizational needs? Does the data you have align with what your IT or technological aspects require you to do? Do you have a strategy for developing your data beyond just the collecting? Do you also have a definitive element of what the quality of your data brings in there? Do you also have elements of reducing errors, mitigating risks that appear? And is it effective to specific policies and procedures that have already been laid out? So things like that. And with that last element, we now move into compliance, where we're now looking at policies, procedures. So under compliance, you have accountability, you have policy enforcement, you have openness, privacy, due diligence, security, data quality. Again, for those who are both technologically inclined and policy inclined, you'll notice that some of these elements already exist in policies, your respective data protection acts, your own internal organizational policies. These already exist. Then ultimately, at the end of the day, there was a common understanding in terms of shared data commons. When we are sharing data with other people, what rises up, what key parameters are put in place. The use of specific standards could be internal standards, could be external standards, could be organizational standards, could be standards that have been set up by government bodies or regulatory authorities. Then we had standardized data models. So this was in terms of creation of specific systems that would either incorporate data. Was there a common understanding on how this is being done? Then in terms of facilitating communication at the end of the day, when we are using data, how is communication between the people who we are using data with? How is it literally? What does the cycle look like? And is it very clear? So those are just basic principles. And as you can see, data governance isn't policy in and of itself, isn't necessarily what's in the policy. It's both a combination of organizational hierarchy, organizational structure, includes of policy and then technical bits and elements in it. Okay, so with that we come to the one that people love the most right now, which is AI. So how is data governance beneficial to artificial intelligence? So AI has become a major reason for the increased demand of data, just by look of the number of AI systems that are being used and the number and the category of AI that is being leveraged even within the continent. One of my colleagues will go through mapping of AI in Africa, and he'll show you the extent to which AI is already being leveraged within the continent. So with that, we find that data used to develop AI is collected through various means. It could be surveys, polls, web scraping tools, cookies, websites, by purchasing data from data brokers. In the previous panel session that we've just had, we've had something about data being expensive. So people are buying data. People actually have been buying data for a while, and it's something that's in market from either data brokers or directly by cutting out the middleman. We also note that Data used for AI development can be through different means such as computation, encryption, or accessing data by oneself, depending on how you collect it yet again. So what's the actual importance of data governance in AI, and how does this correlate? I've just mentioned that data is basically the basis and the foundation for the development of AI systems. So data governance comes in with its holistic structure, including both technical and policy elements in terms of quality and trustworthiness. So effective data governance ensures that data is being used for training AI systems is of high quality to begin with, accurate and relevant. So what does this do when you have quality and trustworthiness when you're looking at data governance? It means that you're avoiding things like, or rather trying to mitigate elements of bias and likely harm of the data that you're using to train your AI systems. Which now brings me again to the mitigation of risks. So good data governance practices help identify and mitigate risks associated with data over collection, such as privacy and security concerns that now come up. The main element of the policy angle of data governance or data protection, so to speak, is always to try as hard as possible to either eliminate the risks that exist when data is being used or mitigate, because we already know that there are certain risks that will come up when we're trying to use data or when we're leveraging data, especially large amounts of data. The other one is addressing bias and discrimination, which I've just also mentioned again. So data governance enables organizations, institutions to be able to recognize and address biases in training data, which can lead to discriminatory outcomes when you're using AI systems. Then a key one is involvement of stakeholders, which is something that we've also heard throughout the conference. Involving both people from different sects or elements or within the ecosystem who are involved in the use of data. Could be policy inclined, could be technological inclined, could be CSO inclined, it doesn't matter. So in ensuring that there is a wide enough pool of stakeholders who can be able to speak into effective data governance practices, especially bringing out elements that may affect certain groups who you're not necessarily paying attention to in the process of collecting your data or using your data. So one last report that I'd like to highlight in terms of importance of data governance in AI is a report that we did on unveiling privacy in the AI era, navigating surveillance ethics and equitable solutions. So this research report was especially significant because it brought out key elements with respect to data governance and how it's likely to impact privacy in the era of AI. So one key element that came out was ensuring that there's privacy by design. So privacy by design is something that's been included in numerous policy instruments, and the report specifically advocated for integration of privacy features into AI systems from inception, which is a fundamental principle of affecting data governance. So right from the moment you decide I'm collecting data, privacy should be a component and not an afterthought, so to speak, as most times you find that at the end of the day it's often an afterthought. So then comes the big one again on elements of data sovereignty, whereby data generated within a nation's border should be regulated by local laws. So for the longest time before we had, I think towards 2019 is when we now had our Data Protection Act, and that was of course propelled by, those who can know, it was propelled by the Maisha number. So a big part of that came up from the fact that now we didn't have specific data protection regulations that was substantive enough for us to have launched or collected data to that extent. And with that, you started seeing a spiral of data protection laws being developed, especially within the East African community. So within the East African community, I think Kenya was among the first to have its data protection regulations. And with that, it solidified an element of data sovereignty in that, which also impacted cross-border data flows and as well as cementing that element of data sovereignty and championing more specifically the fact that data that is being processed, data that is being collected within our nation's borders should stay here. Hence why we still have the words of if I'm using specific platforms from different countries, but that data is being collected and processed within the country, why can't that data be stored within the country and it's being stored in different countries instead? Another element that it clearly brought out was data minimization, which of course relates to collecting only data that is essential for specific AI applications. And the principle specifically contributed to responsible data governance by reducing the potential of abuse and enhancing user trust. And lastly, key element with respect to responsible data use. So data governance ideally is intended to foster responsible data usage by also again promoting trust in AI technologies and encouraging innovation, especially within our digital economy. And so with that, if you have any questions, I would like them to pin them. Don't forget them, please. Just pin them, and then we'll move to looking at the current data governance landscape in East Africa, and then conclude with cross-border data flows. So I'll call on Joshua to take you through the current data governance landscape in East Africa.
All right, so I'll take you through the current data governance landscape in East Africa. We'll start off with the developments that have been made. Hope I'm audible. So after the GDPR came into force, there have been the East African countries have really taken initiative to come with the data protection laws. The GDPR mainly actually it was very instrumental in creating a benchmark for data protection laws. So we had the GDPR, and regionally we had the Malabo Convention, which necessitated the enactment of data protection laws, especially within African countries. So some of these African countries that have enacted data protection laws, we have Kenya, which we have the Data Protection Act, Tanzania, Personal Data Protection Act 2022, Uganda, which has the Data Protection and Privacy Act. We also have Rwanda, the law there, but it relates to the protection of personal data and privacy. Regionally, in the regional sense, we have the EU Data Policy Framework in 2022, which is mainly to establish a unified approach to data governance and facilitate the secure and free flow of data across the continent. Now, coming to East Africa, I think last year there was a convening, and the EAC decided that they will develop a regional data governance policy framework that will enhance digital integration and data privacy. So I'm also looking forward for this framework to see what exactly will be in it, because it will be very interesting for especially regulation and harmonization within the East African region. Now going forward, we have the data protection authorities who play a very significant role, especially in regulating privacy and enforcing data protection laws within a country. So I think in East African countries we have various data protection authorities. First in Kenya we have the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, and Uganda they have the Personal Data Protection Office. I think Tanzania, which I had included there, they have the Personal Data Protection Commission. If I'm not wrong, I think it was established in 2023 and came into force around last year. I think that should be the case. So in terms of AI, since AI has really developed, they really play a pivotal role in regulating it, especially automated systems. They really collect a lot of data, and some can be personal data. And therefore, they are really important in coming up with safeguards and standards to ensure that this data is processed in a legal way and in compliance with data protection laws. And also that they safeguard the rights of the data subjects. So, main safeguards, especially in relation to AI, we say the principle of fairness, which ensures that the data subjects are protected from risks, harms, and biases, and the right not to be subjected to decisions made solely through automated processing, which could also impact data subjects. So automated processing, you might find because they take a lot of data, they get a lot of data and they process it, and this can really affect, can really go against the principle of data minimization. And also, if that data is not really regulated or measures put in place, you may not know what they'll do with this data. Therefore, going against the principle of purpose limitation. So protection authorities' involvement is therefore very important, especially to address data protection concerns and establishing data governance standards in AI applications. So I've inserted an excerpt we got from we did a CBIT. So Florence had already mentioned this, that there was a report. It's actually more of an infographic. So some of the concerns or challenges we find with AI systems, they include informed consent and user awareness. You find that data subjects may not be aware of what their data is going to be used for, and also they may not have given consent as to how their data will going to be used for these AI systems. Another thing is adversarial attacks. We know that all these systems, especially AI, IT, going AI, they are prone to attacks. They may be hacked and all that. And once this happens, the data might be collected and be used for other purposes which were not intended for the sole purpose. Then there's third-party sharing, where data might be shared with third parties, for instance, direct marketing, where you get targeted emails informing you to buy a certain product, and that was not the intention you had when you share your information. Another thing is data over-collection. So we find AI systems, they generally collect a lot of data, and this data might be quite much. And this might also go against the principle of data minimization, which requires you to collect only necessary data. And so if it's collected a lot, you might have some of the information that's linked there, and it might not be good, especially when safeguarding your privacy information. And then transfer of data across borders. So AI might transfer some of your data across borders, and the issue might be why, especially if a country doesn't have privacy regulations or laws that are aligning with another country, there might be a conflict. So that's why the issue of harmonization is very important, so that they align in whatever they're doing, especially in processing of personal data. So next, so the data governance landscape can be has been characterized generally, as I said, with data protection laws and regional harmonization efforts, which have provided a significant opportunity, especially for AI development. And with having data protection laws within our country, they build a foundation of trust. Once a data subject shares his or her data, they know that, yeah, there are safeguards to protect my personal data. So even if I share my personal data for the AI app, I know that they're going to be used for, they're going to be utilized well. Another thing is they facilitate relevant AI solutions, and this is important, especially in cross-border data flows, which might help people like AI developers to access diverse data sets that are better reflect the EA region, and that can help them, especially when developing these AI solutions. So next, it creates an environment of conducive innovation. So well-regulated data ecosystem attracts investment, collaboration, and accelerate AI-driven advancements, because having data protection laws also creates trust with people who might want to invest within a region, knowing that there are certain measures that have already been put in place to protect data subjects. So, example, as I've indicated there, the East African region has really witnessed a surge in AI solutions. And even as CPIT, we have done a bit of mapping to see how the different types of solutions that have been embraced. And then there's a screenshot or a snapshot of what has been done. For like the East Africa community, you see like education is quite high. Then there's agriculture, finance, and health. So you see AI is it's very developing really fast within the AI within the East African region, and therefore this It's important in order to, it's therefore important to have data protection laws and also AI regulations that complement data protection laws. So going forward, there are some challenges that need to be addressed. And the first one is regulatory gaps and fragmentations. So generally, since AI is actually coming up, we find that there are lack of AI-specific regulations, and the existing data protection laws don't really address AI-related risks. We know that AI has its own risks, especially the crimes that are committed with it, and many other issues that cannot really be addressed by a specific data protection law. So this is very important going forward. Next is data privacy and protection risks. So you find the government, as they automate and use AI, there's the risk of AI-driven surveillance by state agencies, which threaten the rights of a data subject, and also initiatives like digital ID systems where you go and share your data. You find that your data might be collected and used elsewhere, which goes against the purpose limitation principle. So these are some of the, especially privacy risks involved with AI. Another thing is cybersecurity and data breaches. Again, East African nations lack AI-specific cybersecurity frameworks, especially to address AI upcoming challenges like deepfakes, fraud. So there's a need to have specific AI cybersecurity frameworks to address these upcoming challenges. The other thing is lack of public awareness and digital literacy. Yeah, I think someone had mentioned, I think it's in the other room, that when it comes, especially if it's in Nairobi, you only find people discussing about data in Nairobi, but in the village, there's lack of awareness. So it's very important to have public awareness, especially secondly, will be to implement stricter safeguards for AI-driven data collection, especially digital ID systems, as I had mentioned. The third thing will be to develop AI-specific cybersecurity regulations to address emerging threats and strengthen regional cooperation on AI-related cybersecurity threats. Lastly, launch nationwide AI and data protection awareness initiatives to educate individuals on their digital rights. Yeah, so I think that's all I had for now. I'll call the next facilitator to come and continue, especially the cross-border data flows. Calvin.
Before Calvin begins, I know some of you are already sleepy, so we're going to do a small exercise just to make sure your blood is, running in the right direction. So I'd please like to ask you guys to stand up, please. Yes, I know, those of you who are familiar with church, I know you, whenever the pastor says, please stand up, turn to your neighbor. I know it's not the best of things, but here we are. So we're going to do two small exercises. The first one is very simple. So just to familiarize ourselves with who is in the room. If you're tech inclined, please raise your hand. When I say raise your hand, I mean it should go up, because also the ceiling is slightly low, which is a good thing, so I can tell how tall most of you are. So just go up. Okay, majority tech inclined. Those of you who are more policy inclined. Wow, okay, so tech people are always more. Good to know. Okay, so with that small exercise, I need to make sure that all of you have neighbors. You need to make sure you have a neighbor. A neighbor or two. If you don't have a neighbor, find a neighbor for now. Okay, so if you've found your neighbor, I need you to raise your index finger, the one that's closest to one person. Just one of you. One of you, index finger. You don't have a neighbor, you need a neighbor, but okay, you can come, we can demonstrate together. Okay, so if you're, please stand on this side. Okay, it's easier. So she's on this side. So index finger, all index fingers, Okay, so if your index finger is like this, I need your neighbor to put their palm on top of your index finger. You can lower it. Kidogo too. Okay. Not like that, like on top. Like this. Yes. So I'll count 1, 2, 3. Then your neighbor is supposed to try and grab your finger. I want to see how alert you are. Are we ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so who caught their neighbor's finger? Who caught your neighbor's finger? None of you did? Okay. Let's try this again. You did? Okay, please stand here. If your finger was caught, please stand here. Okay. So we do this again. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I can't see properly because I'm short, but if you caught your neighbor's finger, please come. Okay, last round. 1, 2, 3. Okay, if you caught your neighbor's finger, please. Okay, so we only have these two. So unfortunately, the two of you are going to be on the hotspot a bit before we proceed to the next and final session. So based on what we have covered in terms of understanding the importance of data governance, as well as understanding the role of data governance in AI, just 2 key takeaways from the both of you on what you have had so far. Like I said, I want to see how awake you guys were.
No pressure, but pressure. One thing that I've taken away from today's session, and just generally from all the sessions that we've had this past few days, is awareness, and awareness at the grassroots level, at the community level, because I feel like that is where you really start to understand and harness how data governance and data protection and privacy can be impactful. Yeah.
Yes, so for me, my takeaway is that data governance is very important because everything is data. For AI to progress, it needs data. People who are saying that data is the new oil, data is the new oil. So there is need for all of us, for all the stakeholders, to ensure that the data is governed well, it's managed well, it's collected well, and it is not used for things that it's not intended to, because it could bring harm to citizens, and we should protect that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Round of applause for those of us who... Perfect. You may have a seat now. Actually, all of you may have a seat now. Thank you so much for participating. Also, if you didn't take the standing up as an opportunity to put in your steps, if you're using the step up, because I realized it's what Nairobians are obsessed with right now. If you didn't take that opportunity, I'm sorry, you can do it later when we finish. So Calvin will take us through the last session.
Hello everyone. As I introduced myself earlier, my name is Calvin Mulindwa, and I'm going to take you through this section titled Cross-Border Data Flows. So we're basically going to be looking through data protection acts and what they regulate when it comes to the cross-border data flow of personal data. Right. Okay, so what is cross-border data flow? It's just simply the movement of data across national boundaries. This can be done over the internet or other forms of transmission. This occurs when data is collected in one country and is transmitted to another country. All of us are probably engaging in cross-border data flows, but we don't know it. Think about your Netflix, your Spotify. You have access to all this information, but you don't actually own the information. So it comes from another country to your cell phone, to your TV, to your phone, and you enjoy that data. So among the 7 East African community countries, there are only 4 that have data protection acts at the time of speaking. And these are Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. The rest do not have a data protection act in force, but they are developing. So I think South Sudan has a bill in place, and the Democratic Republic of Congo uses other acts to kind of make up for the lack of the Data Protection Act. Okay, so beginning with the Data Protection Act of Kenya, specifically Part 6. So one thing I want to communicate across right now, it's not that African countries have said we are not going to send any data across any border. It's that we are open to sending data, but we're going to send that data on certain conditions. And beginning with Kenya, so personal data may be transferred on condition that, one, the country that's receiving the data has a Data Protection Act in force. If it does not have a Data Protection Act in force, does it have other guardrails? For example, your standard contractual clauses or your binding corporate rules. Additionally, it's very important that the data subject has consented to that data being transferred. They must know that this data is being transferred to another country and that they have consented. Another thing is that this data should also be important. We cannot just be sending data for any type of reason. It should be for a legitimate, compelling interest. Additionally, certain data processing can only be done through a server or data center located in Kenya. So this could be an attempt to Kenya to regulate the transfer of data when it comes to sensitive personal data. Think of your biometrics, your DNA, your union membership, your membership to a political party. All that information that is particularly sensitive should be processed or collected in Kenya. Moving on to Uganda. Uganda regulates the space in just a few lines. So it says that data controllers and processors must ensure that the country where the data is processed or stored must have protective measures for personal data that are at least equivalent to those mandated by Ugandan law. So again, adequacy. Do they have a Data Protection Act that is similar to ours that has those safeguards in place? Looking at Rwanda, the same thing we can see. So there's a theme across, though the laws are not identical, there is a certain theme across them. So here it says the data controller data processor must obtain authorization from the supervisory authority by demonstrating appropriate safeguards. Additionally, the data subject must consent to the transfer. The transfer must be necessary for one of the following reasons: performance of a contract, public and legal interests, protection of vital interests, legitimate interests, or compliance with ratified international instruments. We have Tanzania's Personal Data Protection Act, which says personal data can be transferred on certain conditions. For countries that have an adequate personal data protection, if the recipient proves that that personal data is necessary for the performance of a task, or the recipient establishes that the data subject's legitimate interests will be prejudiced. So one thing you need to understand about data protection laws is that they are very human-centric. They're very developed for the data subject to ensure that the data subject's data is protected at all times. Because again, privacy is a human right. So personal data, so looking at a summary of all these laws is that, again, I reiterate, it's not that we do not want to transfer data or that transferring data is prohibited, but we do allow it only if on certain conditions. Another country that is not part of the East African community but is considered an East African country is Somalia, and similarly, again, are there adequate safeguards? Are there railguards? Can the person who is importing the data guarantee us that this data will be protected? When we're sending the data, it should be for, again, legitimate, compelling interests. So the assessment of data or of an adequate level of protection considers several factors, including the similarity of protective principles, like we've seen in the Somali law, enforceable data subject rights, and their judicial or administrative redress mechanisms. So what we can conclude, or rather what we concluded, is that East African countries have adopted a conditional transfer model, which is we will only transfer data on certain conditions, so only if the certain conditions are fulfilled. With regional efforts to harmonize laws, as you've seen, the laws can be very different, they're not identical. So the East African community late last year set out to create and implement the EAC Data Governance Policy Framework. So this policy framework is supposed to mirror the African Union Data Policy Framework, which calls for African member states to to basically treat data seriously, to recognize that data is an aspect that we can trade, that we can make money with this data, but also that transferring this data should also come with very high levels of protection to ensure that data subjects are protected throughout. So to conclude, effective data governance is a cornerstone in the successful development and implementation of AI in East Africa. Establishing robust data protection frameworks will not only enhance user trust, but also facilitate innovation and responsible AI adoption. And finally, fostering regional cooperation is a crucial step towards optimizing the potential of AI while safeguarding individual rights through data governance. Thank you so much for bearing with us. We'll take any questions from the audience.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if this is a question, but every time I'm using AI, I always feel different from when I'm listening to people talking about it. So I'm always a bit confused. And I think I always say that how I knew about AI, it was my daughter who was reporting my son. That my son was using AI to do homework. So basically what my son will do, he will ask AI, give me questions on fractions. Then he goes, do them, comes back. Please give me answers to the question you gave me. Then AI generates the answer, okay? So he marks for himself. So basically, the AI had eliminated me as a parent and the teacher. So the daughter was reporting because he thought it was wrong using AI. Now, maybe that's not the issue. How can I think for me, and I use, because I'm a consultant, I use AI. What it actually has done, it has reduced the information overload. I worked in an organization where I had so much in my head. So it has reduced that overload. But my question is, how can I touch AI? How can I touch it? I always get, touching AI. The truth is, what he has explained is okay, and is scientific, but I'm not touching it. Yeah, I'm not yet touching it. When people say we are using it in industrial places, I want to touch it. I'm missing that point. And by the way, one of the reasons why I came for this conference was the attraction on AI. Because I'm trying to get, other than the generative AI that has really changed my consultancy, I can churn out 6 proposals in a day. 6. I'm not lying. 6. Consultancy pays my bill. My children, have allowed them to revise using AI. So during exams, last term, I'm just finishing. Last term, they came with 2 of them 100% in 2 of each of the subjects. So I actually thought AI will reduce how they perform. But they perform exceptionally well. They're in government school. And in Kenya, government schools are related to they're not performing well. So I just want to touch when they say AI in the industrial space. What are we talking about? When we talk about AI in trade, can I touch it like this? That's the missing link I'm having in all this conversation. Yeah.
That's going to be a tough question to answer. But this is what I'll say. AI holds a lot of promise for all of us. And it depends on how we use it. So if we use it to advance ourselves, then yes, like his children will be passing, will be churning out papers, will be moving forward. But again, you should also be wary of this concept of AI exceptionalism, or that AI is infallible, or that it's 100%, it's Superman in software. That's just not true. So again, when using AI, you should be wary of this. You should be using it with the right intentions, of course. And yeah, when it comes to the industrial space, I'm not so sure I can answer that question, but what AI has done in terms of like genetics, decoding, tracing genetics, making logistics easier. It's going to do a lot of stuff as we move. I mean, right now there are kids who are growing up with AI. They are growing up with 5G internet. Can you imagine telling a Gen Z kid that when I was growing up, we used to have internet that was called 3G? I mean, they look at you like, what is 3G? You know, so it's just the generation that's coming up with, they have more access to these technologies. So it's very important that we guide them when we use these technologies and also use them, again, with the right intentions. That's the best that I can say. Yes?
I wanted to add.
Oh, yes. Yeah, please.
To try and answer it. I think from a philosophical perspective, I stand there. Okay. I stand in front or here. So one of the challenges that we will have, based on just the example you've given, I see two things. For the machine to give the answer, it has to be trained, right? And it is trained with data. So are we working for the machine? From a philosophical perspective, we've watched a robot, and one day will the machine be so smarter than us? Okay, so that's the first thing. And one of the comments that I said in the session earlier was, I think we might need to introduce critical thinking at basic education level, because you've just said you churn out 6 proposals a day. Good, you're using it as a tool, right? But you used to write proposals before. But our children have never written a proposal. They will go to the tool and tell it, like, generate a proposal, and it will do it. But what is the thinking behind it? Because in AI safety, we think about things like the unknowns. Like, you can actually do safety research and actually show that, forget even about bias. You can optimize an algorithm from training it with your own bias as, you know, these people who have been doing, annotation work, they have their own bias. So as a person, they code onto it, forget about the data, like me as the person who is annotating to train the machine. So I think critical thinking from basic education might be important to understand some of these things. And we were having a conversation yesterday, and somebody was talking about critical thinking, talking about experiential learning, like I can go outdoors, I can know this is a tree, this is what happens, this is how Meru looks like, for example. Because when that is lost and you just begin, for me, is to work for the machine, like to train it, and you lose that. So we have to think about that from, you know, tertiary level. We cannot stop students from doing the assignments with the technology. But do they understand the first principles of this? That is missing, and I think we need to think about that.
There are some gentlemen behind you.
Yes. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this. One thing I want to say is that coming from a research perspective, there is no way we can do away with technology. We cannot run away from it. Remember, those who are good students of history, you know, we came from hunting and gathering, but I know some Africans are still stuck there. Then we came to agrarian revolution. So when we moved to agrarian revolution, we did not go back to hunting and gathering. Then we moved to industrial revolution. Now we are in information technology revolution, and we need to appreciate it. Even in research, when I used to do information synthesis, like I'm doing a lot of literature reviews, reviewing papers, digging deep and trying to look at them. Nowadays, I use an AI tool known as Covidence. I can instruct it. Please give me the best 20 papers about the subject, and it will give you an abstract. But you cannot, me, I don't call it artificial intelligence. I call it augmented intelligence. Because our brother there says his son or daughter uses AI. But remember, AI, your son will not stand before that AI and AI gives him or her those results without your son giving that AI the right data. Then my question is, we've been talking about AI, data governance and AI, but we've addressed more of the legal frameworks across East Africa. But my question is, do we have best data management practices or policy towards that extent? Because a good model is as good as the data it has been trained on. If we want AI to continue working for us and make our life easier, how best are we managing our data? Imagine, sometimes I look at my ID card, how it was developed. Sometimes you look at it, you have given them the right information, but they come up with an ID card and you look at the face, it does not belong to you, belongs to a lady, right? So how do we manage data at that level? That is administrative data. Then how possible do we also manage research data and any other data that we have? So we need to also rethink, and Strathmore, I'm challenging you, you are in the field of academia, and it is in academia, those are the workshops for knowledge. Please rethink around best data management policies, and we as FHRC, we are willing to collaborate with you. We collaborate with you on most fronts, but we are calling upon you to start this and let us participate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've been given the signal that time is up. Perhaps we can have a short cue from the gentleman in the checkered shirt.
Okay, I'll try to make it quick. So I'm from the tech end of it. I just wanted to understand from the legal perspective, being that we're in Africa, most times when we think of AI, we quickly think of the ChatGPT and all. But what happens is that AI has the component of machine learning, robotics, augmented reality, and everything in else within that. So as Africa, I really wonder what do we really want to regulate? If in Africa alone, if you look at the data centers that we have, there are about 77 or so, most of which in South Africa. And if you look at the number of data centers, say in a state in US, it's over 4,000. So what are we really regulating?
Okay, that's an interesting question. When it comes to the matter of data centers, it takes significant resources to establish data centers, and that's something as Africa we're coming into the new space. If you've read the draft Kenya AI strategy, you would see that Kenya has placed that as a priority. This is getting external funding to develop data centers, which is very important. But again, we need to first develop the local talent to, be in this space effectively and, dictate how we're going to run things. Because at the moment in Africa, we do have talent, but this talent, it goes into the job market. It sees, hey, by the way, Maze, these jobs, they're not going to pay me. So what do? Let me go work for a multinational and get paid. And that is, we just keep losing and losing talent. We're building other people's systems. So until we either now decide as a nation that we're going to invest heavily into this space, this is talent-wise, human resource, capital, all that, then yeah, we're always going to be playing catch-up. So it's going to take a collective moment of all of us here. If you know somebody in the space, then yeah, we need to gather funding, and then we can now begin developing our local talent. Yeah, that's what I'd say. Yes, I've been given the signal for the 4th time now. The time is up. Thank you guys for coming to this breakout session. We are Sipit. Thank you for listening to us.